You sit there watching everyone else celebrate moments you thought would come to you by now, scrolling through victories that are not yours, hearing people talk about timing and opportunity, while your life feels like it is always one step behind. And there is this quiet question you never say out loud because you are tired of hearing the same empty answers. Why does it feel like everyone else is moving forward, while I am stuck in a season that refuses to change? Why does it feel like I am being prepared for something that never arrives? And the worst part is not even the waiting itself. It is the feeling that maybe you are invisible in the middle of it. Like your effort, your discipline, your silent prayers, your attempts to grow, to stay consistent, to hold on when everything in you wanted to quit. Like none of it is being seen. And you tell yourself to be strong. You tell yourself to trust, but deep down there is this tension between faith and exhaustion that you do not know how to resolve, because you are not losing belief. You are just losing clarity. And that confusion is heavier than doubt, because doubt at least gives you something to fight. But confusion just leaves you standing still, wondering if you are even on the right path at all. And maybe what you have never been told is that this exact feeling, this strange combination of isolation, pressure, and delayed movement is not random, it is not meaningless, and it is definitely not proof that you have been forgotten, because there are seasons where God does not remove you from the crowd to punish you. He removes you because what is coming next cannot be built in noise, it cannot be formed in distraction. It cannot grow in environments where you are constantly being compared, constantly being pulled, constantly being misunderstood. And right now you may not see it clearly, but there is a shaping happening inside you that only works in silence, and that silence feels like abandonment until you realize it is actually preparation. And the reason this hurts so much is because you expected your life to look different by now. You expected progress to feel more visible, more obvious, more recognized. But instead, you have been placed in a process that feels invisible to everyone else, and even to you at times. And that is where the real struggle begins, because it is one thing to keep going when people are cheering for you. It is another thing entirely to keep going when nobody understands what you are becoming, when even the people closest to you start questioning your direction, when even you start questioning your own strength, and yet something inside you refuses to fully give up. Something inside you keeps whispering that there is still a reason, still a purpose, still a moment that has not arrived yet. And if this resonates with you, if you have felt this tension between knowing you are meant for more and not seeing where that more is leading, then let that be known, because there is power in recognizing that you are not alone in this season, and what you are feeling right now is not weakness. It is the weight of transformation that has not revealed itself yet. And the truth is that some people are allowed to move quickly because their path requires speed, but others are slowed down because their path requires depth, and depth cannot be rushed. Depth cannot be faked. Depth is built in the exact place where you feel overlooked, where you feel like nothing is happening, where you feel like you are being left behind. And yet if you look closely at your own life, you will start to notice that even in the waiting, something has been changing. Your awareness has grown. Your sensitivity to what matters has sharpened. Your ability to endure has strengthened. Your understanding of yourself has deepened. And those are not small things. Those are foundations. And foundations are not visible when they are being built, but they determine everything that comes after. And there is a reason why you have been pushed into environments where you felt like you did not belong. Why conversations started to feel empty. Why certain relationships began to fade. Why things that once satisfied you no longer do. It is not because something is wrong with you. It is because something is changing in you. And change always creates distance before it creates direction. And that distance can feel like loss until you realize it is actually alignment. And maybe the hardest part of all of this is that you do not have a clear picture of where you are going. You just feel that you are being pulled away from where you used to be. And that space in between is uncomfortable, because it forces you to trust without seeing. It forces you to continue without confirmation. It forces you to believe without evidence. And that is not easy, especially when you are tired. Especially when you have been strong for longer than you thought you would have to be. Especially when you have had moments where you almost gave up and nobody even noticed. But here is something most people never consider. What if the very reason you feel so out of place right now is because you are not being prepared for something ordinary? What if this delay is not denial but positioning? What if this silence is not emptiness, but focus? What if the reason your path has felt so different is because it is leading to a moment that requires a different version of you, a version that cannot be built in comfort, a version that cannot be shaped in constant validation, a version that can stand when everything else feels uncertain? And that is why this season feels heavier than it should, because it is not just about where you are, it is about who you are becoming. And becoming always costs something. It costs clarity, it costs ease, it costs the illusion of control. But what it gives in return is something far greater. It gives you a foundation that will not collapse under pressure. It gives you a perspective that will not be shaken by comparison. It gives you a strength that does not depend on external approval. And even though you may not fully understand it now, there is a reason why your journey has been tied to something bigger than just your personal comfort. There is a reason why you have felt this internal pull toward growth even when it isolates you. There is a reason why you cannot fully settle into a life that feels average even when it would be easier. And maybe you have sensed it before in small moments, moments where you felt like you were being prepared for something that extends beyond your current reality. Moments where you felt a quiet conviction that your story is not random, that your path is not accidental, and that is not something to ignore. That is something to pay attention to, because not everyone feels that. Not everyone is wired to endure this kind of process. Not everyone is willing to keep going when there is no immediate reward. And yet you are still here, still searching, still trying, still holding on even when it feels like too much. And that says something about you, that says that there is a resilience in you that has been built through every moment you thought you would not survive. And that resilience is not wasted. It is not unnoticed. It is being shaped for something that will require exactly that kind of strength. And even though it may sound unexpected, even though it may not make complete sense yet, there are moments in history, moments in time where preparation and purpose collide in ways that change everything. And you are not being shaped randomly. You are being aligned with a moment that is coming, a moment that will demand presence, awareness, and readiness. And while the world will see the surface of that moment, what they will not see is the years of silent preparation that made it possible, the years of feeling unseen, the years of questioning, the years of growth that happened behind the scenes. And that is why you cannot compare your timeline to anyone else, because your preparation is tied to something specific, something intentional, something that requires you to be exactly who you are becoming right now, even if it does not feel clear yet. And later in this journey, when you begin to see how everything connects, when you begin to recognize that nothing was wasted, that every delay, every rejection, every moment of isolation was shaping you in ways you could not understand at the time, you will look back and realize that what felt like being left behind was actually being set apart. And when that realization fully settles in, it will not erase the pain you felt, but it will give it meaning. And meaning changes everything, because once you understand that your pain was part of your preparation, you stop seeing yourself as forgotten, and you start seeing yourself as someone who has been carried through a process for a reason. And if you are still here, still holding on, still trying to understand, then maybe this is not the end of your story. Maybe this is just the part where everything is being built quietly, before it is revealed openly, and that revelation is closer than it feels, even if you cannot see it yet. There comes a point in every difficult season where the pain is no longer caused by what happened to you, but by what you begin to believe about yourself because of what happened. And that is the place where so many people quietly surrender without anyone noticing, not because they lose their ability to keep working or smiling or showing up, but because they slowly lose the expectation that anything meaningful is still ahead of them. And perhaps you know exactly what that feels like. Waking up with responsibilities to carry, conversations to have, obligations to fulfill, yet inside feeling as though part of your hope has been sitting on a bench waiting for permission to move again. And maybe that is why the image of a great tournament captures something deeper than sport itself. Because before anyone sees 90 minutes on the field, there are years that nobody applauds. Years of training before sunrise, injuries that never make the headlines, disappointments that never become documentaries, moments when talented people wonder whether they have reached their limit. And those hidden years often determine far more than the public moment ever will. And your spiritual life can feel remarkably similar, because there are seasons when God seems to care more about forming your character than changing your circumstances. more about strengthening your heart than accelerating your timeline. And while your natural instinct wants immediate answers, your soul is being invited into something slower, something deeper, something that cannot be measured by how quickly visible success appears, because Scripture repeatedly shows people who experienced long periods of preparation before stepping into the assignments they eventually fulfilled, not because delay itself is the goal, but because maturity often grows in places where recognition does not, and that truth becomes difficult to embrace when everyone around you appears to be advancing faster than you, when friends announce milestones, when opportunities seem to pass you by, when doors you sincerely prayed over remain closed, and you begin wondering whether you misunderstood your purpose altogether. Yet what if those closed doors were protecting you from becoming dependent on things that could never sustain the calling God was shaping within you? What if the silence you dislike has been creating room for a stronger foundation than constant applause ever could, because applause is encouraging, but it cannot transform your heart. Recognition is enjoyable, but it cannot teach endurance. Acceptance is comforting, but it cannot produce the quiet confidence that grows only when you continue walking faithfully without immediate reward. And perhaps that explains why this season has felt so unusual, because you have been learning to keep moving even when nobody is validating your progress. Learning to pray without demanding instant explanations. Learning to trust without possessing complete understanding. And those lessons rarely feel exciting while they are happening, yet they become priceless later, because they shape the kind of stability that survives both success and disappointment. And maybe you have noticed subtle changes within yourself already. Conversations that once consumed your attention no longer seem as important. Comparisons that once stole your peace begin losing their power. Approval that once determined your mood becomes less necessary than it used to be, not because you have become indifferent to people, but because your identity is slowly becoming anchored somewhere deeper than public opinion. And that kind of transformation rarely happens during comfortable seasons. It often grows through questions, uncertainty, waiting, and repeated opportunities to choose faith over fear. And if you have experienced something like this, if you have found yourself becoming quieter but stronger, gentler but more resilient, more compassionate because of your own suffering rather than more bitter, then you are witnessing evidence that growth is already taking place even if the destination remains hidden. And I would encourage you to leave a comment sharing one lesson this difficult season has taught you, because sometimes another person needs to see that they are not the only one walking through a process they cannot yet explain. And there is something powerful about discovering that hope is not built only through victories, but also through shared perseverance. Because isolation often whispers that your struggle is unique, while truth reminds you that many faithful people have walked through valleys before discovering the purpose that was quietly forming within them. And perhaps that is one of the greatest misunderstandings about preparation. We often imagine preparation as learning new skills, while overlooking that God frequently prepares people by reshaping the heart that will eventually carry those skills, because knowledge without humility becomes pride, opportunity without character becomes instability, influence without compassion becomes emptiness, and so before the visible assignment comes the invisible work, before greater responsibility comes greater refinement, before wider impact comes deeper dependence upon God. And none of that feels dramatic from the outside. In fact, it often looks remarkably ordinary. Another day of faithfulness, another prayer without immediate answers, another choice to forgive instead of becoming cynical, another decision to continue believing that your life still has meaning even when you cannot yet see how the pieces connect. And perhaps that is why this season has demanded so much patience from you. Because patience is not passive waiting, but active trust. It is choosing not to allow disappointment to define your identity, choosing not to interpret every delay as rejection, choosing to believe that the God who has sustained you through previous storms remains faithful even while the horizon appears unclear. And there is comfort in remembering that throughout the Bible, people often recognize God's purpose more clearly when looking backward than when living through it, because while they were inside the process, they saw scattered moments, but later, they recognized a pattern of faithfulness woven through every chapter. And your story may feel scattered today, yet that does not mean it lacks direction. It may simply mean you are standing too close to the canvas to recognize the larger picture being painted, and that realization changes how you approach each ordinary day, because instead of asking only why something has not happened yet, you begin asking what kind of person God is inviting you to become today, and that question leads somewhere healthier, somewhere more hopeful, because it shifts your attention from circumstances you cannot control toward transformation that is already unfolding within you, and gradually you begin discovering that your deepest victories are not always external. Sometimes they are the quiet moments when anxiety no longer controls your decisions, when forgiveness replaces resentment, when peace returns after long seasons of inner conflict, when gratitude begins appearing in places where only frustration once existed. And those changes matter, because they reveal that your soul is becoming stronger than your situation, and strength of soul is something no disappointment can permanently take away. And perhaps that is part of why this journey resonates with so many people, because beneath every visible dream there is an invisible desire to know that our lives matter, that our suffering has not been meaningless, that our waiting has not been wasted, and the gospel consistently points toward a God who redeems rather than wastes, who restores rather than abandons, who patiently shapes people instead of discarding them because they have not arrived as quickly as expected. And if that is true, then your current chapter should not be evaluated only by what has not happened yet, but also by what has quietly been healed, strengthened, corrected, and renewed inside you. Because one day you may discover that the greatest miracle of this season was not the opportunity that eventually arrived, but the person you became while faithfully waiting for it. And when that understanding finally settles into your heart, the loneliness begins losing its authority, the comparisons become quieter, the delays become less threatening, and hope begins returning not because every question has been answered, but because you have encountered the faithfulness of God in the middle of unanswered questions. And that kind of hope is durable, steady, and capable of carrying you into whatever chapter comes next. One day you will realize that the season you spent trying to escape became the season that quietly transformed everything about you, not because every painful memory disappeared or because every unanswered prayer suddenly received an explanation, but because you finally saw that God had been doing a deeper work than the one you kept asking Him to do. You wanted immediate relief, but He was building lasting strength. You wanted visible progress, but He was forming invisible character. You wanted certainty about tomorrow, but He kept teaching you to trust Him today. Looking back, you will notice moments that once felt insignificant, evenings when you sat alone, wondering whether anyone understood what you were carrying, mornings when you forced yourself to keep going, despite feeling emotionally exhausted, prayers whispered through tears that seemed to disappear into silence. None of those moments were wasted. They became part of the quiet foundation beneath the person you are becoming. That is often how spiritual growth works. It rarely announces itself while it is happening. It unfolds slowly, almost unnoticed, until one day you respond to a situation differently than you once would have. You forgive more quickly than before. You become less controlled by fear, less dependent on approval, more anchored in hope. And you suddenly realize that something inside you has changed, even though your circumstances may still look similar. That realization is one of God's gentle reminders that transformation usually begins within long before it becomes visible around us. Perhaps this is why you have never fully belonged everywhere you have been. Perhaps this is why certain doors closed even when you desperately wanted them to open. Perhaps this is why some relationships quietly faded while others never developed the way you expected. It is painful when life unfolds differently from the picture you imagined, but painful does not necessarily mean purposeless. Throughout Scripture, we repeatedly see people whose greatest periods of preparation were marked by uncertainty rather than clarity. They learned obedience before leadership, dependence before influence, humility before responsibility. Their journeys were rarely straightforward, yet God's faithfulness remained constant even when His timing remained mysterious. The same timeless truth can encourage you today. You do not have to understand every chapter in order to trust the author of your story. Faith is not pretending to have all the answers. Faith is continuing to walk, even when only the next step is visible. There is something deeply freeing about accepting that your value has never depended on how quickly your dreams unfold. Your identity is not determined by how many people notice you, how many opportunities appear this year, or how closely your life resembles someone else's. Your worth was never built upon comparison. It was established by the God who created you with intention, who knows every hidden struggle you have faced, every disappointment you have carried, every silent victory nobody celebrated except Him. Sometimes we imagine that purpose is discovered only through extraordinary moments, but more often it grows through ordinary faithfulness. It grows every time you choose integrity when compromise would be easier. It grows every time you choose compassion after experiencing hurt. It grows every time you continue hoping despite disappointment. These quiet choices shape the kind of heart that reflects God's character far more than public recognition ever could. As you think about the months ahead, perhaps even as the world gathers around moments of excitement, celebration, and shared anticipation surrounding events such as the FIFA World Cup 2026, remember that seasons of preparation exist in every area of life. Athletes prepare for years before stepping onto the world's biggest stage. Teams endure setbacks before competing together. Supporters wait with expectation before the opening whistle ever blows. Yet your deepest preparation is not for a sporting event. It is for every opportunity God places before you to love others well, to remain faithful, to encourage someone who is losing hope, to become a source of peace in a world filled with anxiety. If the World Cup reminds you of anything spiritually, let it remind you that meaningful moments are rarely separated from long seasons of unseen preparation. While millions celebrate what unfolds before their eyes, God continues the quiet work that unfolds within hearts. Your calling is not measured by whether you stand before crowds. It is measured by whether you remain faithful wherever He has placed you today. The world often celebrates visibility, but heaven values faithfulness. The world rewards performance, but God delights in transformed hearts. The world measures success by applause, while Scripture continually points us toward perseverance, humility, love, and trust. That perspective changes everything because it releases you from the exhausting burden of trying to prove yourself. You no longer need to rush your story or force doors open that God has not opened. You can faithfully embrace today's responsibilities while trusting tomorrow to the one who already sees the entire journey. If you have walked through rejection, let it become compassion for those who feel unseen. If you have walked through loneliness, let it teach you how to welcome others. If you have walked through waiting, let it deepen your patience with people whose journeys are unfolding differently from yours. God has an extraordinary way of redeeming painful experiences by allowing them to become sources of encouragement for someone else. The very wounds you once wished had never existed may one day become places where another hurting person discovers hope, because you understand what they are carrying. That does not erase your pain, but it gives your pain purpose. Before this message comes to an end, take a moment to reflect on how far God has already brought you. You may not be where you hoped to be, but you are also not where you once were. There were days you believed you would never recover from certain disappointments, yet here you are. There were nights when fear seemed stronger than hope, yet somehow God carried you into another morning. There were seasons when you questioned whether your prayers mattered, yet your heart continues seeking Him. That alone is evidence of grace quietly sustaining you. If this message has met you in the middle of your own waiting season, share your story in the comments. Someone else may read your words and discover the encouragement they have been praying for. Sometimes God comforts people not only through Scripture, but also through the testimony of another believer who kept trusting Him through difficult days. Never underestimate what your faithfulness may mean to someone you have never met. Finally, remember this truth whenever uncertainty tries to convince you that your story has stalled. God is not hurried, and His faithfulness is not limited by the pace you expected. Your current season may still contain unanswered questions, but it also contains opportunities to grow in wisdom, patience, courage, and hope. Those gifts will remain with you long after circumstances change. Keep walking, keep trusting, keep allowing your heart to be shaped by God's love rather than by fear. One day you may look back and realize that the chapter you once wanted to skip became the chapter that taught you to know God more deeply than any season of comfort ever could. And when that day comes, you will not simply celebrate what finally happened. You will be grateful for the person God patiently formed while you were waiting, because you will understand that He never abandoned you, never forgot you, and never stopped working, even during the quiet seasons when you could not yet see what He was preparing.